Hello, my name is Rick Odie and I live in Tremont, Illinois. I have been presenting President Lincoln for nearly 4 years now, and in my research I've realized that he struggled deeply with deep depression in his life, most all of his life. This topic is personal to me because my wife and I lost our 21-year-old son in April of 2001 to the physical illness of depression. Well, you may wonder why I call it the physical illness of depression, and that's because the chemicals in the brain are imbalanced, and until medications supply that right balance, the person who is clinically depressed cannot live a normal life. Not unlike people who struggle with diabetes. Until the chemicals are balanced in their blood, they can't attain a normal life as well. But I have noticed that for some reason our population doesn't have a problem talking about diabetes, but the topic of depression is often neglected to be talked about. After writing the script for Lincoln's Melancholy, I sought the guidance of a psychologist. I felt like I needed to get the information correct. The last thing I'd want to do was to cause harm to someone with faulty information. Well, I sought the advice of a good friend of mine, Greg Batten, on the Greg and Dan Show on 1470 WMBD Radio in Peoria. I figured with his talk show and the amount of people that he knew, he could point me to a capable psychologist that could help me develop Lincoln's Melancholy correctly. Well, he was quick to recommend Dr. Stephen Hammond of the Antioch Group in Peoria, Illinois. I reached out to Dr. Hammond through email, and that began a 1-year-long correspondence with him, developing the text and getting it correct for Lincoln's Melancholy. If after viewing Lincoln's Melancholy it speaks to you, I would encourage you to support your local chapter of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. I've also developed a YouTube page. You can search my name, Rick Odie. There you can find Lincoln's Melancholy talk as well as other Lincoln talks that I have done. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. Hello, my name is Abraham Lincoln, and I had the honor and the privilege, and quite honestly, felt the great responsibility to serve our nation as its 16th president. Well, maybe some of you here today think of me as a young store clerk in New Salem, Illinois, who one day closed the shop early, walked 5 miles to return 6 cents that I had mistakenly overcharged a customer. That walk gained me the nickname Honest Abe. It's a nickname I would carry with me the rest of my life, although I much prefer just to be called Lincoln. Maybe to some of you, I'm the young prairie lawyer who traveled the 14 counties of the 8th Judicial Circuit in central Illinois, who one day dismounted my horse and scooped up 2 baby birds that had been blown out of the nest, and was able to climb the tree and return those baby birds to the safety of their mother's nest. Maybe to some of you, I'm the man who penned the Emancipation Proclamation and encouraged all of Americans to see to it the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. By my strong convictions and the grace of the Almighty, I am that man. But there's a part of my life that I would like to share that I don't believe is ever shared, or not very often anyway. It's part of my life I called my hypo. Doctors in my day would refer to it to melancholy. The good Dr. Hammond here of the Antioch Group in Peoria would refer to it as depression. Well, as early as 1831, in that store, I was beginning to study law books. I would be in the front of the store in the down times of the store studying law books, and my business partner would be in the back of the store studying the bottom of an alcohol bottle. Well, over time, he would drink up all the profits of our store, and we would close. He died soon after that, and the debt from the store came back on me. I felt a great responsibility to not only pay my debt, but his as well. In order to do this, I had to let my surveying equipment go to auction. I was sharing with a farmer friend of mine that my life wasn't turning out like I had hoped it would. In fact, I wasn't even sure my life was even worth living anymore. Well, he saw my plight, went to the auction, and he purchased that surveying equipment at auction and returned it to me. His caring for me, most likely, saved my life, and with it the course of history. Well, also in 1835 in New Salem, I had fallen in love with a young woman named Anne Rutledge. She and I were planning to be married. However, before we could, she died suddenly. That was my first emotional breakdown, and it was a burden to me to think about rain and cold falling on her grave. I would wander in the woods for days on end. Thankfully, my good friend Judge Bowling Green and his wife Nancy took me in and cared for me for several weeks. One of my law partners once said that melancholy dripped from me as I walked. The truth is, friends, I struggled mightily with melancholy. Well, you may be wondering, why is he telling us this? We're short on great men. What is he trying to prove? Just let us enjoy Honest Abe and don't drag him through the mud too. Well, I cannot, and I will not. The character that God has placed in me will not allow me to be silent and do nothing. When I know that 1 in 3 people in our country struggle to get going every morning because of their depression, or the fact that 50,000 people in our country will die at their own hands this year. Now we can look at 50,000 as a statistic similar to what we looked at the 620,000 who died in the Civil War. They were each a person, just like the 50,000. In our country today, we lost Nathan. Nathan was 19 years old when he passed away. He was a good tennis player and he loved exotic cars. He was in college and he had plans for his life, and his family misses him dearly. Where there's Cassie. Cassie died at 20 years old. She was the flute captain of her high school band. She was also in college, had plans for her life. Brian died at 21 years old. He was a IT person at a major insurance company. He was an excellent guitar player in college and had plans. 60 teenagers will die at their own hands this year just in the state of Illinois. 22 military veterans will die today, each day, by their own hands. Richie was 20 years old when he passed away, and his father passed away in his late 60s. So 50,000 people will die at their own hands this year. Worse yet, depression leading to suicide will be the #1 cause of death in our country. I cannot and I will not just be a historical figure captured in white marble when I know there's a chance that I can help good, honest people struggle through this form of darkness. Well, you may ask, where does this come from? That's a good question. There's a pile of logs over there, so let's go split them. There's some who would say, well, it ran in my family. Well, that is true. My Uncle Mordecai was much loved in his town. He would often roll a basket of apples into the schoolhouse for the teacher and the pupils. However, over time, he began to get more moody, and he would think that people were out to get him. Of course, his situation was made harder because of his heavy drinking. Should come as no surprise that his 3 sons were also known as melancholy men. My own father, Thomas, was a poor dirt farmer, and he would often have bouts of the blues, and he would wander in the woods for days on end, and I'm sure the townspeople thought the worst. One of my cousins was known to write stories of letters and notes that when read would defy any touch with reality. Another cousin was committed to the Illinois State Hospital for the Insane. One Lincoln relative referred to these as the Lincoln horrors. Well, it might be what you would call today genetics or heredity, but I'm here today to tell you there's much more than that. Life was full of hardships and loss in my day. As you know, my father Thomas was a poor dirt farmer, and life was a struggle for him. I lost my baby brother when he was just an infant. Death came often and stayed much too long. I mentioned my baby brother had passed. Of course, the hardest loss in my life came when I lost my angel mother, Nancy, when I was only 9 years old, to the milk sick. I clung to my sister, Sarah, who was just 2 years older than me at 11. However, she was married in 1826, and in 1828, she died giving birth to a stillborn baby. So much has been said about Mary's and my sons. Eddie died at 3 years old in Springfield, and Willie died at 11 years old at the White House in 1862. I won't say too much about them, just what I said at the White House the night Willie died. It is hard to see them die. Well, one more hardship I must mention, because it formed the spine in me for my attitude towards slavery. Initially, my father had encouraged my mother to teach me to read, and she used the one book that most households had in their house at the time. It was the Holy Bible. I learned to read the Holy Bible, and that would establish in me a habit that I would carry with me all the rest of my life. However, as I got older and stronger, my father thought it was time to work, and it was time to put the reading books down. In fact, it got so bad that he would often beat me when he caught me reading, which was quite often. He would hire me out to landowners. They'd work me very hard, and all the money I had to return to him. Well, with the beatings and forced labor and all, I was ready to leave my father's house by the time I was 22 years old. I never did return. However, I did miss my stepmother, Sarah Bush Johnston. Well, when I was 22, I was hired to take a flatboat of dry goods down to the Mississippi River, down to New Orleans. Well, that was my first education with the slave trade. And quite honestly, it sickened me to see black men, women, and children being chained together, sold as property, no different than the dry goods that I had delivered to New Orleans. My days feeling like a slave, with my father having to give all my money to my father, came back on me. The big difference, however, was I was going back north, and these people were going to be saddled with slavery the rest of their lives. I vowed right then and there, if there was ever anything I could do about that, the slave trade, that I would do it. Well, they say whatever don't kill you makes you stronger, and I guess that's right for me. Loss and hardship did kill me many times over in my heart. Well, close kinship to hardships were the stresses and the setbacks of public life. In 1832, I ran for the Illinois legislature. I was 23 years old. I lost that election, went back to New Salem, and was quite depressed. However, in 1834, I ran for that seat again. I won that seat and would carry that seat for 4 two-year terms. In 1846, I ran for the U.S. House of Representatives and served 1 term. I went back to Springfield, where I had moved to open my law practice up, and I began my law practice. However, in 1858, I ran for the United States Senate against a gentleman named Stephen A. Douglas. He was running on the platform of allowing slavery to spread into the new territories. And I was running against that I didn't want slavery to spread into the new territories. Well, I lost that election, and I went back to Springfield again to study the law and practice law. Well, little did I know, I had caught the attention of some influential people, and they encouraged me to run for the presidency in 1860. I was nominated in Chicago in May of 1860, and and won the election on November 6th of 1860 and became the 16th president of the United States. And I guess you know the rest of that story. Well, the worst part of being president wasn't the fact that 11 states left the Union before I had been in office 3 months, or the fact that I had to sneak through Baltimore even to get to Washington, D.C. For the inauguration. No, the worst part was the gut-wrenching responsibility of sending young men off to their deaths in the Civil War. You will recall I know a thing or two about grief and loss, and I was grieving with each of these families as they were losing their young men. This drove me into a deep depression. If you need witness of that, just go to Springfield and see a photograph of me when I was elected, and then one 4 years later. The last potential setback came in 1864 when I ran for my second term of office. I had gotten the Emancipation Proclamation passed in 1862, and in January of 1863, slaves came up out of the South and even formed black regiments. Thankfully, I won that election in 1864, and in January of 1865 was able to pass the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which abolished slavery. Well, the war ended on April 9th of 1865, and 5 days later, Mary and I took a ride through the countryside, and we talked about what we might do after my second term was over, and we thought we might travel the country and for the world. Well, we made our way back to the White House, and a young senator, no doubt with a request on his mind, rushed up to me, and I stopped him short, and I said, "Not today, Senator. Mrs. Lincoln and I are going to the theater." Well, I want to mention one cause for my melancholy that, thank Providence, has largely been debunked since my day. And that was the belief that a self-made man was someone who came from humble beginnings and through intellect and courage had bettered himself. He was thought to most likely go insane. Well, the main basis for this wisdom is that a person gained their intelligence from their father, but their emotional temperament from their mother. Well, by these lights, all I would ever amount to would be a farmer or a cabinet maker. It was therefore understood that if I aspired to the law or politics, that I would struggle being out of my intellectual depths by many leagues. The constant struggle of myself and other self-made men would put us on the precipice that the life that we aspired to, just one shove, would push us over into the abyss of melancholy or madness. To this theory of my depression, I say good riddance and rubbish. When 1841 I suffered my second emotional breakdown, I had asked Mary Todd to be my wife, and then I got thinking that everyone I became close to was dying. I broke that engagement off. I wrote a letter to my law partner at the time. I said, "I am now the most miserable man living. If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face on earth. Whether I shall ever be better, I cannot tell. I awful forebode I shall not. To remain as I am is impossible. I must die or be better, it appears to me." Well, what besides Providence would make me better? I'd like to take you back to my angel mother, Nancy. Nancy taught me, my mother taught me, that character is like a tree and reputation its shadow. The shadow is what we think a person is. The real character is the tree. So looking back, I can say that something in me early on became determined not to just cast my tall height as a long shadow. There had to be real character behind it. As part of that character, I believe Providence gifted me with a gift to tell humorous stories and jokes. I'd like to share a couple of those with you now. When I was 11 years old, I was in Andrew Crawford's ABC school in southern Indiana, and it was spelling day. Well, two boys had already misspelled a word, and it was Kate Roby's turn, and the schoolmaster was quite upset. Well, Kate took stood up next to her chair, and her word was the word defied, as in the little boy defied the giant. Well, she started out very confidently, D-E-F, and then she stopped. And I could tell what the next letter was. I knew it was what the next letter was. And I was standing across the room, and I cleared my throat, and I slowly raised my finger to my eye. She smiled broadly and spelled the word D-E-F-I-E-D. The schoolmaster was pleased, and we all got recess that day. Well, during the Civil War, I was chided many times for telling humorous stories at such a serious time in our nation's history. One particular senator chided me, and I took him by the shoulders and I looked him in the eye and I said, "Ashley, if I could not tell these stories, I would die." Two of my favorite stories was one young man was going off to war, and his two loving sisters embroidered him a belt and presented it to him, held it up, and it said, "Victory or death." Well, he didn't like that. He gave it back to them and required that they embroider him another one. So they did that, and they presented it to him, and he held it up, and it said, "Victory or get hurt pretty bad." Well, he wasn't any more taken with it than that. My favorite story during the Civil War was two silver-haired ladies were arguing about who might win the war. The first silver-haired lady said, "Well, I believe Jefferson Davis is going to win the war because he prays to God." To which her friend was quick to say, "But I believe President Lincoln prays to God as well." To which the first silver-haired lady said, "Well, that may be, but when Lincoln prays to God, God thinks he's joking." Well, I'm not the only one that could fire off a funny salvo. Miss Todd, before we were married in Springfield, we went to a soiree, and I sidled up to Mary and I said, "Miss Todd, I would desire to dance with you in the worst way." Well, she granted my request. We danced one dance, and after we were finished with our dance, she said, "Abraham, you said you desired to dance with me in the worst way, and I believe you did." Well, I rapidly learned that you don't handle depression alone. I've already shared with you my farmer friend James Short, who went to the auction to purchase back my surveying equipment, my friend Judge Bowling Green and his wife Nancy, who were a big part of my recovery. Well, in my early 30s, I shared with my law partner Stephen Logan that I wasn't sure I measured up to my opponent in a case. And he shared with me that it's not the start in life that's important, but how we keep pushing into our middle years. Well, I knew my challenge then was just to keep pushing into my middle years. Well, while you don't conquer depression alone, there's one group of people that pretty near makes you feel like you could, and that was the doctors in my day. The doctors in my day looked at depression or melancholy as being caused from an outside source, like a fever or malaria, and the body had to be cleansed of that. Well, in order to do that, a patient would be bled over about a 2-month period, up to 12 pints of blood. Of course, you can imagine how tired this would make a person. Then there would be suction cups, or sometimes leeches would be used to draw the blood to the surface. Then, of course, laxatives and emetics would be applied to clean the body out that way. In fact, one thing that made me want to make this talk to you was to tell you thankfully, happily, that treating depression today is in no way like it was in my day. Today, doctors will prescribe medications to help with the symptoms of depression. Then, of course, you can talk to a psychology caregiver and hopefully get to the source of that problem that's causing you the depression. In fact, each time I had thought about taking my life, I had the reoccurring thought that I had to somehow reassure myself that the world would be a better place because I had been in it. So I urge you, if you are depressed, find a cause greater than yourself, hitch yourself to it, and just keep pushing. You can live, and more than that, you should live. Every life has value. Find that value in you, or do as I did, seek the value that others had in you, and hitch yourself to that and live up to that full measure. All tree and no shadow. My purpose in this life, thankfully, by the Almighty, gave me the ability to stop one person from owning another person as property. You too are here for a purpose, and I encourage you to find that purpose. Life waits for those who choose to live it. I thank you for listening today. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.